Hi, Mrs. B here. Let's review for the 6.1 to 6.4 quiz on Wednesday. Remember to pause your video, try the problems, and then check your answers with mine. Okay, starting with 6.1, we're going to change between percents, fractions, and decimals. So let's start by changing these percents into decimal form by dividing by 100, because percent means out of 100. And that's it. Now to change into decimal form, we just write them as we see them. 68 hundredths. Let's simplify that by dividing top and bottom by 4. So 4 over 4 is just a fancy form of 1, and we end up with 17 25ths. And for our second decimal, we have 424 1,000ths. Again, we're going to divide by 4 over 4. And we end up with 106 over 250. Oops, we're not done yet. We got to divide by 2. We end up with 53 over 125. Okay, now we are in simplified form. Let's change our decimals into percents by multiplying by 100. So our first decimal would be 140%. And our second decimal would be 0.5%. Next, let's write the fractions in simplest form. So 1.4 is the same thing as 1 4/10, and that's 1 2/5. And our second one, we have 5 out of 1,000, which we would simplify to 1 200th. And we are done with this page. Okay, next we're going to order numbers from least to greatest. You can turn all your numbers into decimals or into percents. I prefer decimals. So I'm going to turn 15/16 into a decimal by dividing 15 divided by 16. And we have this, 0.9375. And 90% is, of course, 0.9. And then we have our numbers that are already as decimals I'm going to leave alone, and then 7/8 we have 0.875. So if we were going to put these in order from least to greatest, first we have 7/8. Remember to write your answer in the original form it was presented in the problem. And then our next would be 90%. And then next we have 0.925. Next we have 0.93. And last we have 15/16. And there we have it. There's our 5 numbers written from least to greatest. Okay, we have to do the same for the population of that part of Florida. So the only ones we really need to change are, we're going to change 0.45% into a decimal. So it's 0.0045. 1910 is already as a decimal. 136 is 0.027 repeating, and 1/16 is 0.0625. So I'm just going to number them from least to greatest, and it actually turns out, doesn't it, going from our oldest year is first, 1910 is second, then it goes to 2010 being the most. So I hope you got the same answer as me. Okay, moving on. We're going to do some percent problems. I'm going to show you both the proportion and the equation way to solve each of the problems. So for number 11, our proportion would be x is to 100 in the same way that 0.2 is to 16. We can use cross products. 0.2 times 100 and divide it by 16 to get our answer. Or let's use our equation that we can find 0.2, I'm sorry, our part, and divide it by our whole. And then don't forget to multiply by 100 to turn that decimal into a percent. Either way you do it, you end up with this answer of 1.25%. Okay, on to our next problem. We're trying to find the whole. So we can either write our proportion, 24.5 over 100 is equal to our part, 19.6, out of our whole, or we can write an equation which would be taking our part and dividing it by our percent in decimal form. Whichever way you choose, we would be getting the same answer of 80. Okay, and let's go on to number 13. So we're trying to find again the whole. We know the part and we know the percent. So let's first do the proportion. 30 is to 100 as 3/5, which I'm going to write as a decimal to fit it in my proportion nicely, is to x. Or we could use our equation and take our part and divide it by our percent written as a decimal, and that's super easy to get our answer of 2. So 2 is the whole we're looking for. And lastly, we're trying to find the part. So we have 45 is to 100 as x is to 5/9, which I'm going to leave as 5/9 for our purposes of using cross products now. 45 times 5/9 and divide it by 100. Or we can use our equation and do our, let me try that again. Let's take our percent and write it as a decimal and multiply by our part, our whole, I'm sorry, and we end up with our part, which would be 1/4. Okay, moving on, let's try some word problems. There are quite a few word problems on the quiz, so be sure you read them very carefully to figure out what they're asking for. Is it the part? Is it the whole? Is it the percent? Okay, so I'm going to use equations actually for each of these, but you are welcome to use proportions as well to solve these. For the first one, we're finding the part of 360. So we write our percent as a decimal and we multiply by our whole, and we end up with 72 runners that were in that age bracket. Make sure you label your answers with what they mean in real life problems. In number 6, we're trying to find the whole. We know the part. So what we really have is now our part that we want to divide by our percent, written as a decimal, and we end up with $4.10. And for number 9, we're trying to find the part of 35, so 0.6 times 35 would tell us that there's 21 competitors, I guess I would say competitors who are in that category. Okay, one more word problem. So for this one, we have to compare you and your friend on different days for selling tickets. So I'm going to write down below for A, says what percent of the tickets sold on Thursday did you sell? So we have to find out what your part is. You sold on Thursday 15 out of what was the total? you plus your friend is 25. So remember, we can write this as a decimal first. 15 divided by 25 is 0.6, but we must finish by multiplying by 100 to turn it into percent form. So 60% of the sales on Thursday were yours. And for B, you're finding out what percent of your sales on Friday were yours. So this time you sold 9, and our new total would be 9 plus 16, which happens to be the same number as for Thursday. And 9 over 25 is going to give us 0.36, which we would multiply by 100 to turn it into a percent. So 36% of the sales on Friday were yours. And then for C, you're getting a combination of both days. So similar, but we need to add up the parts that you sold. The 9 plus the 15 is 24 out of the total of you and your friend for both days, which is 50. Pretty easy in this case to use a proportion because we're just raising that up to 100. So we would multiply by 2 to get our answer of 48%. So over the course of the 2 days, you sold 48% of the tickets. Okay, I hope this helps you study for the quiz. You can also look over your homework problems and try the self-check quiz for the questions that were for the beginning part of the chapter. Okay, take care.